I'm just going to get straight into it. So we're speaking on Trump tariff, from Trump tariffs to regional opportunity, AfTA and the future of intra-African trade. This is quite an interesting, topic to discuss on because of the importance of both issues. That is Trump tariffs and the integration of the AfTA, the African Free Continental Free Trade Agreement, which has gained momentum in the last couple of years. And then it looks like President Trump, his actions, his may cause a bit of obstruction in a sense. So before we get into the meat of it, there are a few terminologies that I am assuming that everyone knows what these terms mean, but I'm just going to say it for the sake of, because it's going to be common to this conversation. So what is free trade? In the simplest terms, free trade is when two countries can buy and sell with each other without restriction. So two nations, Nigeria and the US, they are in agreement to buy and sell goods and services, exchange goods and services between each other and without restrictions. And these restrictions usually they are removal of, let me say, taxes or rules or anything that may hinder, the exchange of goods and services. So, in the absence of those things that hinder the exchange of goods and services, we say that there is free trade. Then, what is protectionism? Protectionism, on the other hand, is like an opposite. And as the name sounds, it is when countries or nations choose to limit importation of goods. They don't want too much goods imported. So they place restrictions on importation of goods with the aim of mostly protecting their own domestic industries. Um, and these restrictions, they are usually, it is the same restrictions that are removed when there is free trade that are installed when there is protectionism. So these restrictions could be taxes that the government would charge, that is also called tariffs. And it could be rules. It could be rules like non-tariff barriers like quotas and, you know, maybe even the import procedure, making it difficult, or anything that just restricts importation of goods. That is when we say that there is protectionism, or it's, they call it protectionist, policies or theories. And then there is tariffs that I believe we all know, simply the taxes charged when goods are imported into a nation. Um, there is also non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers, they are those barriers that are not, because the taxes that the government charges the tariffs, but there are non-tariff barriers, which, like I said earlier, could be rules, it could be, import controls, it could be rules like border closure, like the one President Buhari did a couple of years ago. It could be import quotas, where the government will say, okay, you cannot import more than 1,000 cars in a year. It cannot be more than that, something like that. So, or it could even be regulations or procedures, complicated, um, import procedures or anything like that. So, I wanted to set this one up so because they are most likely good words that we will use in this conversation. So, free trade, protectionism, two sides of a coin. What are they? What is the context? What is the where these all of these economic theories come from? Of course, we have explained, or we understand what those words mean, but when we look into the history, the world, from onset, have not always been a free market in quote. Free trade was an economic theory that was postulated by the popular Adam Smith in his great book, The Wealth of Nations. That was in the 18th century, 1770 something. And then there was also David Ricardo, who was also who postulated the theory of comparative advantage, saying that a country should focus more on what they have the most, what they can do, what they are the best at. So in that case, we can say Nigeria, you've got oil, you've got agriculture. Perhaps these are your comparative advantages compared to another country that's got maybe some other things, maybe uh, auto manufacturing, or maybe South Africa with its auto manufacturing or stuff like that. So, just I wanted to lay this background, and then before we, talk about the Trump tariffs and the impact on Africa. So there is a popular story whenever free trade is discussed, there is a popular policy. I think it was in the 19th or 20th century from the UK. It was called the Corn Laws. So it's more like the number one example of how free trade became a popular economic theory, and how the world came to this place where countries exchange with each other. Back in those times, the UK had a law in the 19th century that restricted importation of grains into the country. And the main reason was because they were protecting their domestic industry, a sector of people, right? But there was around the same time, there was famine in some part of the UK, and yeah, there was an outrage in the country for the repeal on the of the corn law. Why, even though the government at the time, according to history, was not such in support of free trade ideologies, the leader at the time opted for that policy. They repealed the corn law, allowed importation of grains, and what happened? The agricultural sector at that time was impacted because there was importation of lots of grains. But what happened is that there was some job loss, but the people benefited because prior to that, grains was very expensive. And after they repealed that law, grain became very cheap. Consumers were able to feed better, food prices, became cheaper. And afterward, it was said that that was the beginning of how the UK moved to manufacturing and industrialization. That's just to lay a little bit of background of the history from free trade and how we got here. But protectionism, on the other hand, has also always been popular. The United States, like the UK, those were the countries that led the popularization of free trade in the world. Um, but there was a time that when in the United States as well, that they were protecting their industries. They had high tariffs on a lot of goods to protect the domestic industry. But later on, all of these tariffs were removed. However, what we have seen is that it seems or appears that the United States, which is a country, a major proponent of the idea of free trade, is now a major proponent of protectionism, with President Donald Trump, uh, you know, invoking tariffs on almost all the countries of the world today. It's no news. I'm sure that is the essence of this conversation. We all heard about that news when President Donald Trump invoked what is called the International Emergency Economic Power Act, gave universal 10% tariffs on all imports to the United States. To certain countries, there were more. We call them the reciprocal tariffs, to the point that between the US and China, if they've gone about 140 or 125% tariffs on each other. So what is the implication of this on Africa? How would this impact the world? Like as I have said earlier before this moment, in the comparison of free trade and protectionism, one thing or one of the pros, one of the advantages or the benefits of free trade that we all have benefited from in one way or the other is economic efficiency and how it drives productivity. So, and that is based on the concept or the theory of comparative advantage, where when two nations are allowed to or permit each other, have agreements to trade with each other, it turns out that their comparative advantage comes to fore because you're definitely going to have certain things that some countries don't have, and that is going to be your advantage. But beyond economic efficiency and productivity and improving or increasing productivity, there is also the benefits to the consumers. In the free trade system, it has allowed the world or the consumers to benefit. Imagine we're Nigerians and I don't know if there are mobile no, not auto, mobile phone manufacturers in Nigeria. I want to assume that there is none. If there is, you and I know that we probably don't know them or the world does not know them. Now imagine a world where we are restricted, Nigeria is isolated, and we do not want to trade, with or a world that has not embraced free trade. How then would we have as consumers? How would I have this, mobile phone that I'm using right now? How would you have yours? So you- the benefits of free trade is there for all of us to see. It has afforded us options as consumers. It has lowered the cost of goods and services. It has um, improved or encouraged innovation because entrepreneurs or innovators know that they only have to get something right. When they do, it is the world is it's a global market that they have access to. So how would Trump tariffs, knowing that free trade has benefited us much more than any argument against it? The common argument against free trade is, job displacement, income inequality, and so on. But we rarely talk about the consumer benefits. We rarely talk about the innovation and growth that it brings to the world, even to the poorest country in the world. We rarely talk about how based on comparative advantage, a nation is able to increase its productivity. So how would this impact Africa? Before we go into how exactly Trump tariffs is going to impact Africa, I wonder if any of us are aware of AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. AGOA was a trade program of the United States that was launched I think it was in year 2000. It was signed into law by, I think it was President Clinton there. That program was meant to run for 8 years, and it was particularly for sub-Saharan African countries. And it was about allowing sub-Saharan African countries, excuse me, It was about allowing sub-Saharan African countries duty-free access to the American market. So there were lists, thousands of products that under that program, the United States permitted sub-Saharan African countries to bring into the United States duty-free. Duty-free is tariff-free, right? So this program launched in 2000, was meant to go for 8 years, went on for 8 years, and it was extended between again. Apparently, it must have been good for the US and good for Africa. For it to have, it must have been a win-win for the United States to have thought, oh, let's extend this further. It was extended to 2015, and then President Obama again in 2015 signed the extension again for another 10 years to 2025, until the great President Donald Trump, he's now in office. The AGWA program is meant to, obviously, it looks like with the new Trump tariff, AGWA has come to an end because it's already all African countries, I believe, have been placed a universal 10% tariffs. Some even have more. I think Nigeria has up to, I think 14%. South Africa up to about 30%. Some other countries, a few African countries have much more than the others, but the least is 10% now. It has gone. So what happens to all of those products that sub-Saharan Africans have benefited from under the AGOA program? Thousands of products. Although, because many have said that I've sort of analyzed what the impact of AGOA program has been. It felt like it's been said or it's been reported that the achievement or there were also criticisms of the AGOA program, and criticisms were like the program was not well utilized because some countries benefited more than the other, like Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. Those three countries used it so much more than some. Other criticisms were like, it's not, I mean, sometimes America can restrict you from using it. There was a time that Ethiopia was suspended from, taking part in the program based on, political and human rights situations. They used that as a form of sanction on those countries. So those were some criticisms of the program, but ultimately, he really helped the African continent with because we're able to diversify, exports of some of our goods. So now that is one clear impact of, how the Trump tariff is going to impact Africa, because now 2000, we're here in 2005. This has been going on for 25 years, and President Trump doesn't think that, at least not yet. So there are still debates going on in the US. Should the US extend AGOA, or should it be replaced with this reciprocal trade agreements, with bilateral trade agreements? And there has been those indication. I think it was last year, President Ruto of Kenya was in the US, and there were talks of bilateral trade agreements between the US and Kenya. This is the same Kenya that is part of AGOA that has benefited from it. So it seemed like with President Donald Trump, America is trying to want to deal with, each country bilaterally instead of using like a blanket program. But clearly, this is a setback for, for the continent, because, and of course, it's also, there are implications for the America as well. But this call is not for us to discuss the implication of Trump tariffs on American citizens, which I believe that is going to actually increase cost consumer prices of goods for American consumers. It is they cannot you cannot eat your cake and have it if you're putting so much tariffs on importation of goods. It's your businesses and the people, your consumers, that are going to pay for the increase in cost of those goods. So it's not good for them. Neither is this good for Africa. So before, one of the areas where this has impacted Africa is there's currently the decline in US Africa trade. And you're seeing that more African countries are trading more with China. It's already bad that Africans do not trade with themselves. And that is the essence of the AfCFTA. That's why the AfCFTA has come to existence, because the rate of trade, intra-African trade, is about 15% or less than 15%. In Europe, is about 50 something percent rate at which they trade with themselves. In Asia, it's about 60 something percent. In North America, is about, I think, 30 or 40 something percent in the American North American in North America. But in Africa, it's about 15 or less. So we trade more with the US, with the UK, with Europe, with Asia, than we trade within ourselves. So, which is the reason why the FTA was brought into existence in the first place. But with the Trump tariffs, there's going to be a further decline in US Africa trade. I noted the data here. It says that in 2024, total trade between the US and Africa was estimated at 71.6 billion. Um, so yeah, so agua export, the exports from half sub-Saharan Africa to the US, as at 2008 was $82 billion. So Africa exported worth of $82 billion of goods to the US in 2008. That was 8 years after AGUA started. As at 2024, before Trump's tariff, it has declined to $29.1 billion. That is a huge drop. That you would, if I didn't get the data for it, but if I had gotten the data for Africa exports to China or elsewhere in the same period, I'm sure it will be much more than that now. So there's been part of the impact of these Trump tariffs is that shift in trade partnerships. You all would have heard of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, calling, that trying to add more countries to join that BRICS bloc. Why? Because of the shift in trade partnerships, because of Trump tariffs, because of the position that America is putting itself in the global trade system today. So that is one way that Trump tariff is going to impact Africa. For some countries, it's going to be even worse, like loss of job. I found a data. It says that Lesotho, for instance, is going to be facing 50% tariff on its exports to the US. And this is going to threaten its textile industry, because that is the area that their comparative advantage, and they do a lot of export of textiles to the US. And that industry employs about 36,000 people. So you can imagine the thousands of people that would be that would lose their jobs. The same thing in Madagascar and in Ivory Coast. Madagascar is going to be facing about 47% tariff. Also, in their textile jobs, they risk losing 60,000 jobs, which contributes 20% of the country's GDP. In Ivory Coast as well, their cocoa exports, Ivory Coast, Ghana and Ivory Coast, both countries contribute exports, I think, more than 50%. I hope I'm correct, if anyone can correct me, but they are the top two cocoa exporter in the world. So they will be facing 21% tariffs, and this would definitely destabilize the local market and affect their farmers. So what is the implication of non-tariff for African exporters? Um, because we have relied heavily on import using programs like the hardware, it now shows it's clear now there is a need for economic of for diversification. Where do we diversify? Where do we take this export to now? If taking it to the US is going to be much more expensive, we need to take it to other African countries. We need to look at other. Of course, we've always already been trading with every other part of the world, but we trade less with ourselves. So there is a need for Africa to now look inward and begin, to trade more with each other. Of course, this is going to there could be other challenges like financial strain for African exporters, but it is time for Africa to look within the continent and begin to trade much more with each other. There are arguments that, unlike other developed nations where we can export raw cocoa, export a lot of raw materials because they already are industrialized and can easily refine this to finished products. Most African countries are not industrialized. They are still, we are all trading in the same similar goods, mostly raw materials. And that is a challenge for the continent because if we have not industrialized, we are not industrialized enough to refine these goods, it means that instead of exporting chocolate products, Africa could have, as a matter of fact, Africa should have, for example, the best chocolate products anywhere in the world. Why? Because between Ivory Coast and Ghana and Nigeria, we have enough cocoa to do anything in the world. But no, we have the raw material. They have the best refined products that have been made from it. This is one of the problems that have, kept us here. Now, what is, we've talked about the challenges. What are the opportunities for Africa in all of this? The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is a is an opportunity, a regional opportunity, like the topic of this webinar says, from Trump tariffs to regional opportunity, AfTA and the future of intra-African trade. AfTA is an opportunity for Africa. The AfTA, as many of you may know, was an agreement that was adopted by the African Union for the 2063 goal of the Africa we want. In building a vision of and the Africa we want, the African Union came up with different strategies, and one of which is the African Free Trade Agreement. When you look at the European Union, they have a number of countries. They are a bloc, and as a bloc, they are a very powerful bloc in the world. Why can the African Union, why can Africa not be another powerful bloc in the world? We can. And one of the things that helped the United European Union to be that powerful is first the ability to be able to trade together as one. They have a benefit over Africa. They use the same currency. In Africa, we do not have that luxury of one currency. In Africa, we have too many security challenges from Congo to Sudan to Mali. Now we have the AES, the Sahel states now with Mali, Burkina Faso, junta-led governments, not, pushing back against neocolonialism. They don't want to associate with France anymore. All of those challenges that exist on the continent today are, in a way, uh, obstructing the African unity. And if if Africa is going to unite, some things will come first. There is a popular saying by Frederick Bastiat that if goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. We first have to let goods cross borders. But before we let goods cross borders, we need to let people cross borders. Africans should be able to cross border, go freely move on that continent, on our continent, and goods should be able to move freely on our continent. When those two things go first, when we put those two things ahead, it would be easy for the continent to be a bloc. And when Africa is a bloc, you know, there is a lot of benefits. So the AfTA, the agreement, the free trade agreement, African Free Trade Agreement, was established for goods and services to facilitate the free movement of people and goods and services and investment on the continent, because we are the continent with the least intra-regional trade. And with this, it is said that the agreement will eliminate 90% of tariffs over a period of 5 to 13 years, depending on how quick we've been able to achieve this. So this is a great opportunity for Africa. As of April 2025, 54 out of 55 African Union nations have states have signed the FTA agreement. The only one that has not signed is Eritrea. Eritrea is the only country that is yet to sign, ratify the agreement, but 54 out of 55, that is good. Signing is different to implementation. Um, so I think different countries are at different levels. There's been the Guided Trade Initiative, which is like a pilot phase. So they've had the first pilot phase with about 6 countries testing out the processes, and they've also had, I think they've launched the second guided initiative phase with Nigeria, I'm aware, has also been a part of. So why is the FTA good for its size of over 1 billion people? What is one of the advantages that China has today? Aside from the fact that the country has industrialized, as the leaders have ensured that that country is industrialized, they have a huge market size, over 1 billion people. Africa has over about 1.4 billion people. That is a huge market size. It means that we can have hundreds of unicorns on the continent if we can exchange goods and services, with each other more easily. So, like I said, the first phase is the guided initiative phase. I think they've done 2 phases now. 7 countries, the first one, about 7 countries, the second one as well. So, this, the FTA would help Africa diversify our trade. I remember when COVID-19 happened, there were, there were obstruction, not just to Africa, to the whole world. The goods couldn't move, right? So um, we don't have to wait for that. Something similar, when Trump tariff, I remember the day, Liberation Day, Trump called it, when it was the reeling out those reciprocal tariffs. I was watching, and for like the first 1 week, it shook the world. It shook the world. Every corner of the world felt that, and I'm sure you were hearing in the news, we're seeing posts and stuff going on about it, and there were some report that said that the global stock market crashed in such a way that was similar to COVID-19. That's the impact that Trump tariff has had. And then there was the back and the forth, you know, with China. There was the pause for some months or days. There was also there's a lot of negotiations going on between countries and the US. Perhaps America is trying to whatever America or whatever Trump is up to. This is no good for anybody. It's not good for the world. But it shows that anyone can come up any day and do things like this. What if China comes? What if China comes tomorrow?
Are you getting Africa's a man runs around a beautiful girl with water for the guest at her wedding?
Someone is speaking. Can you please mute yourself? She probably didn't know. Sorry about that. So I'm also coming to the end of it. So I was saying that anyone could have, if China comes tomorrow and does exactly the same thing that President Trump did, I'm sure the world would be on its knees because we all know how important China has become in manufacturing to the world today. But the AfCFTA offers an opportunity for African nations to diversify our trade, to enhance our regional value chain. When we begin to trade more with each other, there will be a need for road network that can go from Ivory Coast to Lagos, from Lagos to Abidjan, from Abidjan to, wherever, from Abidjan, from, Ivory Coast to Ethiopia, from Kenya to South Africa, would invest more. The continent will begin to invest more in such networks, road networks, port infrastructure, all of the infrastructure that is needed. And before you know, it will begin to improve our value chain, will begin to industrialize even further. So, and this will strengthen economic resilience of the continent because if things like this then happen some other time, we will be able to withstand it. Our governments would trade will still be able to would and still keep going on the continent, and the government will feel it less because usually when things like this happen, the shock that it has on most African nations are usually too much, and it usually impacts revenue generation for our governments. And when revenue generation is impacted for most African governments, they can't do the things that they have highlighted to do in the budget for the year. So, and these usually would have impact on the health sector, the agricultural sector, education sector, on all sectors. So there are many benefits to it. We'll be able to increase intra-African trade like every other continent. This will spur economic growth. It would help to reduce poverty because then we would have to, as like I said earlier, invest in value chain, industrialize more. And this will also help to attract foreign direct investments. So there'll be more investment on the continent. The continent will also embark on development. Will not, instead of, imagine how it's common sense. Why should I trade more from Nigeria or from Kenya or from Uganda? Why should they trade more from Africa with UK, Europe, America than we trade within ourselves? Common sense. It doesn't make common sense. It's more expensive to travel within Africa in some African countries than it is to travel from Africa to some other countries outside Africa. So there has been too many barriers, tariffs and non-tariffs, that has plagued trade in Africa, and all of those needs to be removed. And this, with Trump tariffs and the implications for the African government, and especially if AGOA is not extended, and this is an indication that we need to take our destinies in our own hands and focus on intra-African trade, on building our regional value chains, on, enhancing industrialization, because all of this will boost employment, will reduce import dependency. We may not be able to produce everything that we need, and that's fine. but the law of comparative advantage will work in favor and will balance it out, because there are certain goods that are produced in South Africa that will easily be distributed to the continent. There are certain things that Nigeria will be the best at, will be easily distributed across the continent. And there are certain things that may be the best from Ethiopia or maybe the Kenya tea or Tanzania, anywhere in the world. So this is an opportunity for the African continent, and hopefully our decision makers. And I'm not sure. I know that the liberalist is.
Sorry, I think we can't hear you anymore. I'm not sure. Please, can we confirm if we can hear him?
No, I can't hear you from my end.
Please, can you hear me now?
Yes, very, very clear. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah. So just wrapping up here, I was basically just saying that. So what do we do now? We have highlighted the challenges that Trump tariffs has, the implication of Trump tariffs for the African continent. We talked about how the AfCFTA is an opportunity for, African nations to diversify now and do what must be done. So as advocates of, you know, as change makers, as advocates of solutions to our problems, the African continent, so solutions to problems in our society. What do we do? Keep advocating for what we believe is the best. It's very important that we take out. It's not just tariffs only. For a lot of African nations, we are already like Trump, and it's okay because almost every country in the world, has or gets tariffs. You pay tariffs when you import in almost any countries in the world. But what we advocate for is less tariff. For most African nations, tariffs are a form of revenue generation. I know very well in Nigeria, the Nigerian Custom Service is a revenue generator for the government. In fact, they make loads of money every year. They bring lots of money into the government coffers. So and what this does really is that it is we, the people, that pay this cost. That's why if you ask a lot of Nigerians, automobiles have become very expensive. Because we import a lot, we are import dependent. That's why the cost of lots of things are expensive. Mobile phones, automobiles, laptops, lots of things, even food, and it's across the continent. So what do? We need to cut down on tariffs, because when we reduce tariffs, just like if you remember the corn law in the UK, when they allowed importation of grains, history says it that food became cheaper, prices of food became cheaper. They were, of course, it had impact on the agricultural sector, but there were wins. So it's not always one way. There are always, there would always be an impact. The impact here could be less revenue for the government, but it would mean more for the people, for consumers, because they have options of goods and products and services to choose from, because these things are cheaper. And when consumers this when consumers benefit from things like this, especially when we're trading more with each other. When we reduce tariffs across the continent, goods coming from other countries, we also take our goods to the other countries. This was going to, enlarge the market. Our decision makers just need to ensure the implementation, proper implementation and quick implementation of, the AfCFTA. Of course, there are a lot of things that are needed to make this happen, but we need to start somewhere, um, and ensure that the consumers benefit and Africa trade more with each other. This, I believe, is the way forward in a world of Trump tariffs. You would agree with me that I need to take a pause, hear from you. If you have contribution, questions, thoughts, please don't hesitate. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for this wonderful session, Mr. Larry Peter Elefison. So I would actually say I really got so much insight from your session. So if we have questions, let's please signify. You can just use the hands emoji so I would know. And if you would love to type, please let's do that in the chat room. And yes, I actually during your session, Vincent dropped a write-up. So he said that okay, this is very insightful, but until African countries start negotiating trade deals as a bloc rather than individually, our ability to secure favorable terms will never be achieved and will continue facing the wrath of tariffs. Would you love to talk about that?
Thanks for that. So I agree with Vincent, because that's exactly what the EU does. I mean, with all of this going on with Trump tariffs, Trump is not saying you, America and Germany, or America and Spain. It's been the EU is been with the EU. So any country that's not in that bloc, yeah, it becomes bilateral. That's why you see when Trump was doing the reciprocal tariffs, there were countries directly, China, India, Nigeria, but with the European Union, it was the EU. And likewise for the UK is the UK, because that's about, I think, 3 countries in there. So as a bloc, we have more power as a bloc. 55 countries, 55, a market of 1.4 billion people. That is a huge market. But you would also agree that there's a lot of work to do to ensure true unity in Africa. Sometimes it's difficult to even say, or with how things have been, some countries in Africa do not want to be in Africa. When you look at countries like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, they are more kind of associated with the European Union than with Africa because of proximity. Morocco is quite close. It's quite close to the EU, and they are kind of advanced. But you see how they are. They are really not like, even though they are Africans, they really do not. Or maybe this is I'm probably maybe not stating facts in this sense, and I'd like to know what you think. But those countries don't. It appears that they would rather want to be. They would rather be in the EU, and they can't be. In fact, history says that they attempted. One of those countries attempted being in EU, but was not allowed. Now I can't remember which one exactly, but Vincent, I agree with you that we need to trade more as a bloc. If we trade as a bloc, if the AfCFTA works, and we need to make it work, we are going to advance further as a continent.
Oh, thank you so much for that. So that's true, actually. If you actually check those countries you mentioned, even some of them actually look like, the white, the European. So that's true. So yes, if we actually have questions, I'm still expecting our questions. So you can just unmute yourself and ask your question before we end the session here. So, okay, I think someone's hand is raised. Favor, your hand is raised. Yeah, you can unmute yourself.
All right, thank you so much, Precious. And Mr. Larry, thanks for that session. That was really, really insightful. I've learned a lot so far. Yeah, so my question is, you mentioned that Africa needs trade as a bloc, like intertrade, but in recent times there have been issues of countries fighting each other. We have the Sudan, we have South Sudan, we have Eritrea, we have Ethiopia fighting each other. Now, if countries like in Africa, if countries fight each other, let's put internal conflict aside, external conflict, how do you think we can unite as a continent to each other with the current issue, with the current conflict? Thank you.
Yeah, Favor, thanks for that question. So, there are people who believe that the problem with Africa is both, and I don't even think that's not even, it's not a conspiracy theory. And I also believe to an extent that the problem with Africa is both internal and external. So when you go to the root of those conflicts, those countries that you mentioned, and the the causes, what's happening there, you will find that sometimes it is based on issues internally, and sometimes there are those that not not known to the public. There are those that are being supported or backed by external forces. Who are those external forces? I don't know and I can't say, but it's a fact, you know. Um, and it does appear like there are forces against African unity. We have to be honest with ourselves. You know, look at, for instance, the junta-led countries in Mali, Burkina Faso. These guys are saying no to France. They don't want to, because they are Francophone nations. They've been, how France has really sort of meddled in their issues for many years, and they are trying to say no to that. It's more like wanting independence after their independence, sort of. And in doing this, there are actually countries backing them, supporting that for them. For example, Russia is in good support of, Mali. Or as we speak today, there are Russian mercenaries in these countries, in Mali, in Burkina Faso. There are Russian mercenaries helping, claiming to help them, and they are getting things in return. Mali is a country rich in gold, natural resources, particularly gold, oil, and this is what the Russian mercenaries, which are a body of their government, in claiming to support to help them is actually causing more harm because you're saying no to France. You're saying you're receiving support from another, kind of country that really does not want you to, to thrive. It's about their own interest, their gains, how they can tap your resources. So, Favor, there is the internal problem with African unity. We as a people, the issues going on, the security issues going on in Nigeria with the recent killings in that is a Plateau is not, I don't think is an external issue. I don't think. Right. So there are those ones that are causing us problems internally. And there are those ones that are backed by some other countries. If you go to Congo, what have they got? Congo is very rich in resources, very rich. There's been war for many years. Sudan, the same thing, many years. They have factions, so, and when you get the fact behind these things, you see some countries behind this faction, some countries or some forces behind the other faction. there can never be peace in such places. So the insecurity issues, the conflicts, they are a big barrier to uniting as a continent. A big, big, big barrier. And we cannot overemphasize it, but there's not an easy solution to it. So that's why, if despite these conflicts going on, which of course we need to resolve, but despite the conflicts going on, if we get the trade right, and all African countries now know that we are trading more with each other and accept the rules of engagement, and that agreement is implemented across board, perhaps there would be a reduction in conflicts, because I really don't think that there's not a lot of conflict between African nations, fighting each other per se, except you would see maybe Sudan and I think maybe South Sudan, a few cases. I think Ethiopia and one other one. If a few cases is when you see conflicts between two African nations. It's usually within, but being supported. And if you come to West Africa with the junta-led government, it's not yet conflict with, say, Nigeria and the other ones that are not junta-led, but they are being backed as well by certain forces, and all of those things are barriers. They are barriers, and I don't have one easy solution to it, because we actually need to take those things out for everything to be peaceful and great as we desire.